Imagine this: a quiet evening, a moment of solitude, and an unexpected thought enters your mind, one that whispers promises of pleasure, excitement, or escape. At first, it seems harmless, maybe even justified. But over time, it begins to consume you. You feel its weight pressing down, a shadow over your heart. You know it's wrong, yet it feels impossible to resist. That small seed has taken root, and now it grows unchecked, separating you further and further from the peace you once knew. This is the story of countless souls, ordinary people, just like you and me, who find themselves ensnared by a temptation so powerful, so subtle, that they don't realize its full grip until it's too late. These aren't just fleeting mistakes. These are the sins that can shatter your connection with God, leaving you isolated, ashamed, and questioning your very worth. But what if I told you that even the most terrible of sins, the ones you think define you, can be overcome? That no matter how far you've wandered, there's a way back, a path to freedom, to peace, to God's unending mercy? And that this isn't just wishful thinking, it's a promise, proven by countless stories of transformation and redemption, like those inspired by Padre Pio. For a moment, close your eyes and reflect. Have you ever felt trapped in a cycle you couldn't break? Have you ever done something in secret, hoping no one would find out, yet felt the sting of guilt every time you thought about it? These feelings aren't random. They're warnings, a signal that something isn't right. And ignoring them only deepens the pain. Today, we'll uncover what Padre Pio himself called the 3 most terrible sexual sins, the ones that separate you from God forever if left unchecked. These aren't just sins to be feared, they're traps that millions fall into, often without even realizing it. And here's the truth: if you're listening to this, you might already be caught in their web. But here's the good news: you don't have to stay there. You have the power to break free, to reclaim your life and restore your relationship with God. I'll show you how Jonathan, an ordinary man like any of us, overcame the grip of sin and found the courage to rise above. His story will inspire you and reveal the exact steps you can take to experience true freedom. So, if you've ever felt the weight of guilt, the shame of silence, or the struggle of resisting temptation, stay with me. Together, we'll explore not just the dangers of these sins, but the incredible promise of redemption that awaits you. And before we dive deeper, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. By doing so, you're joining a community committed to transformation and faith. Here, you'll find wisdom, inspiration, and the tools to overcome life's greatest challenges. Click that subscribe button now. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Jonathan was the kind of person everyone gravitated toward. With his bright smile and a natural charm, he had a way of making people feel seen and valued. He worked hard, always lending a hand when someone needed help, and his dedication earned him respect in his community. But behind the confident exterior, Jonathan carried a secret, a subtle yet powerful struggle that began to unravel his seemingly perfect life. It all started innocently enough. Jonathan had recently been promoted at work, and his newfound success came with opportunities he never imagined. Social gatherings, networking events, and travel filled his calendar. At first, he was cautious, mindful of his values and the teachings he'd grown up with. But slowly, the allure of the world began to draw him in. One evening, at a colleague's party, Jonathan encountered a scene he wasn't prepared for. The laughter, the glamour, the subtle but unmistakable air of indulgence. It was magnetic. He felt a pull, a temptation to step out of the boundaries he'd always lived by. Just once, he told himself. It's harmless. And so, with little thought of the consequences, he allowed himself to indulge. That single choice opened a door. It wasn't obvious at first, just small changes in his routine, a little less time spent in prayer, skipping mass occasionally, dismissing the quiet voice of his conscience. But over time, those small compromises snowballed. Jonathan found himself chasing fleeting pleasures, drawn to a lifestyle that promised excitement but left him feeling empty. At night, when the world was quiet, the guilt crept in. He would lie awake, replaying his actions and feeling a deep unease he couldn't shake. What's wrong with me, he wondered. Why do I keep doing this? He tried to brush it off, convincing himself that everyone made mistakes, but the weight of his choices lingered. One day, Jonathan glanced at an old crucifix hanging on his bedroom wall. It had been a gift from his grandmother, a reminder of her faith and love. For a moment, he felt a pang of longing, a desire to return to the peace he once had. But just as quickly, another thought entered his mind. You're too far gone. There's no going back now. That lie took root, deepening his despair. Jonathan began to notice the cracks in his life. His relationships grew strained. Friends and family who once admired him sensed something was off. His work, once a source of pride, began to feel hollow. But he couldn't bring himself to confront the truth. Instead, he buried himself deeper in distractions, hoping to silence the growing ache in his soul. And then came the moment that changed everything. One evening, after a particularly reckless decision, Jonathan found himself alone in his apartment, overwhelmed by shame. He picked up his phone and mindlessly scrolled through social media. That's when he stumbled upon a video. The thumbnail caught his attention. Padre Pio reveals the sins that separate us from God forever. Intrigued and desperate for answers, Jonathan clicked play. The words hit him like a thunderbolt. Padre Pio's teachings, his unwavering commitment to God, and his battle against sin resonated deeply. For the first time, Jonathan saw his actions for what they were. Not just mistakes, but choices that were pulling him away from everything he truly valued. At that moment, Jonathan realized he couldn't keep running. He didn't know how he would change, but he knew he had to try. Now, let me ask you this. Have you ever found yourself in a place where the weight of your choices feels unbearable? Have you ever longed for a way out but felt unsure of where to start? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. And if Jonathan's journey has captured your attention, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Together, we'll explore not just the struggles but the incredible paths to redemption and peace. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's uncover what comes next in Jonathan's powerful story. Jonathan's life, once so full of promise and hope, had become unrecognizable. At first, the changes were subtle, almost imperceptible. He would skip his morning prayers, telling himself he was too busy. He avoided his family's invitations to Sunday Mass, convincing himself he needed rest. The choices seemed small, even inconsequential, but they began to build like bricks in a wall, separating him from the peace he once knew. One day, Jonathan sat alone in his apartment, staring blankly at the television. The silence between commercials was deafening. The excitement he had once chased so fervently now seemed meaningless. The parties, the fleeting moments of indulgence, the thrill of crossing boundaries, they had all left him feeling empty. The joy he once experienced in his faith, in simple acts of kindness and connection, was gone, replaced by a nagging sense of guilt and shame. He tried to shake it off, but the feelings lingered. When Jonathan looked in the mirror, he saw a stranger staring back. His once bright eyes were now shadowed by doubt and self-loathing. How did I get here? He asked himself, but deep down, he already knew. The weight of his choices began to press down on him, a heavy burden he carried everywhere he went. At work, he found it hard to focus. His colleagues noticed his distraction, but when they asked if everything was okay, he forced a smile and said, "I'm fine." At family gatherings, he avoided conversations about faith or spirituality, afraid someone might sense the turmoil within him. The guilt he felt wasn't just about his actions. It was about the distance they had created between him and the people he loved. Jonathan started to withdraw. He stopped answering calls from friends who once looked up to him as a source of encouragement. The thought of facing their disappointment was too much to bear. He convinced himself that they wouldn't understand, that they would judge him if they knew the truth. But the isolation only made things worse. In his solitude, Jonathan couldn't escape the memories of his past. Every mistake, every poor choice played over and over in his mind like a haunting melody. The shame was relentless, whispering lies that he was unworthy of forgiveness, that he was too far gone. "Why even try?" the voice in his head would say. "You'll just fail again." But it wasn't just the spiritual pain that tormented him. Jonathan's emotional and mental health began to deteriorate. The once confident man who walked with purpose now moved with a heaviness in his step. He became irritable, snapping at others for no reason. His nights were restless, filled with dreams that left him waking up in a cold sweat. The sense of despair was overwhelming, a constant reminder of how far he had fallen. One evening, as he sat on his couch, Jonathan picked up his Bible. The cover was dusty, a stark reminder of how long it had been since he last opened it. Flipping through the pages, he stumbled upon Psalm 38 verse 4. "For my iniquities have gone over my head. Like a heavy burden, they are too heavy for me." The words pierced his heart. He felt as though they had been written just for him, describing the exact weight he carried every day. Tears filled his eyes as he closed the Bible. "Is this who I've become?" he whispered. He longed for the peace he once had, the confidence that came from knowing he was walking in God's light. But the path back seemed impossible to navigate. Jonathan's struggles began to affect his relationships in profound ways. His family noticed the change in him, but they didn't know how to help. Conversations that once flowed easily now felt strained. He avoided eye contact, afraid they might see the guilt in his eyes. His friends, too, sensed the shift. The once vibrant and caring Jonathan now seemed distant and guarded. The most painful part for Jonathan was realizing how his actions had eroded his trust in himself. He no longer believed he was capable of making good decisions or being the person he once was. The confidence he had once radiated was gone, replaced by a crippling self-doubt. But even in his darkest moments, there was a flicker of hope, a faint but persistent feeling that things didn't have to stay this way. Jonathan began to reflect on the stories he had heard growing up, stories of redemption and grace. He remembered the parable of the prodigal son, a story he had always loved for its message of unconditional love and forgiveness. Could it be possible, he wondered, that God still loved him despite everything? That question lingered in his mind, growing stronger each day. The shame and guilt were still there, but they were accompanied by a new thought. What if there's a way back? What if I can find peace again? Jonathan's story isn't unique. It's the story of so many who carry the weight of their choices, feeling trapped in a cycle they can't break. But here's the truth: no one is beyond the reach of God's mercy. The first step is acknowledging the burden, recognizing the toll it has taken, and daring to believe in the possibility of redemption. Now, let me ask you this. Have you ever felt the weight of guilt pressing down on you, making you feel unworthy or distant from those you love? Have you ever wondered if there's a way to find peace again? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else to take their first step toward healing. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Together, we'll explore stories of transformation, hope, and the incredible power of faith. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's continue Jonathan's journey to redemption. Jonathan sat in his dimly lit apartment one evening, lost in thought. The weight of his choices had been pressing on him for weeks, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was spiraling further away from the person he once was. The silence in the room felt deafening, and for the first time, he found himself longing for clarity, for some kind of guidance to make sense of the chaos within him. Scrolling through his phone, he stumbled upon a video with a thumbnail that seemed to leap off the screen. The words were bold and unignorable. Padre Pio's battle against sin, a message that could change your life. Intrigued but skeptical, Jonathan hesitated. He had heard of Padre Pio in passing, a saint known for his devotion and miraculous life, but he had never paid much attention. Something about this moment, however, felt different. Against the doubts swirling in his mind, he clicked play. The video began with a serene image of Padre Pio, his kind eyes gazing into the camera, almost as if seeing straight into Jonathan's soul. The narrator's voice was calm yet firm, recounting the story of a man who had dedicated his life to God despite unimaginable struggles. Jonathan learned of Padre Pio's relentless battle against sin, not just for himself but for those who came to him seeking spiritual guidance. He heard about the saint's unwavering faith, his physical and spiritual suffering, and his miraculous ability to bring people closer to God. Jonathan couldn't look away. Every word seemed to resonate deeply, as though the message was meant just for him. Padre Pio's teachings about the dangers of sin weren't condemning but honest and direct. The saint spoke of how sin created a rift between the soul and God, a gap that could only be bridged through repentance and grace. Jonathan felt exposed, as if someone had peeled back the layers of his life to reveal the hidden struggles he had tried so hard to ignore. What struck him most was how Padre Pio's message didn't end with judgment. It was filled with hope. The narrator recounted how countless people who had been burdened by guilt and shame found solace and transformation through his words. Jonathan couldn't help but wonder, could the same be true for him? The video continued, diving into stories of people who had encountered Padre Pio's teachings and emerged renewed. A woman who had been estranged from her faith for years found her way back to God through confession. A man whose life had been consumed by destructive habits discovered a strength he never knew he had. Each story seemed to echo Jonathan's own struggles, and with every example, his skepticism began to waver. As the video ended, Jonathan sat in silence, his heart racing. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope. He didn't know where to begin, but he knew he couldn't ignore the message he had just heard. There was something profoundly real about it, something that called to the deepest part of him. Over the next few days, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about Padre Pio. He started researching more about the saint, reading accounts of his life and the countless testimonies of those he had inspired. What stood out most to Jonathan was how Padre Pio didn't just preach about overcoming sin, he lived it. His life was a testament to the power of grace, even in the face of immense challenges. Jonathan began to see his own struggles in a new light. He realized that the shame and guilt he had been carrying didn't have to define him. Padre Pio's teachings emphasized that while sin was destructive, it wasn't the end of the story. God's mercy was always greater, waiting to meet those who were willing to seek it. One evening, Jonathan decided to take a step he had been avoiding for months. He walked into his local church, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. The quietness of the sanctuary enveloped him, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. Kneeling before the altar, he whispered a simple prayer. "God, I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try." That prayer marked the beginning of Jonathan's journey back to himself and to God. Inspired by Padre Pio's example, he started taking small but intentional steps to realign his life. He began attending Mass again, reconnecting with the faith community he had drifted away from. He reached out to an old friend, someone he knew would understand and support him. And most importantly, he made the decision to go to confession, a sacrament he had avoided for far too long. The experience was both humbling and liberating. As he poured out his heart, Jonathan felt the weight of his guilt begin to lift. The priest's words of absolution weren't just a formality, they were a reminder of God's unending love and forgiveness. Jonathan left the confessional feeling lighter, as though he had been given a second chance. Jonathan's journey wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when he stumbled, when the old temptations resurfaced. But this time, he faced them with a new perspective. Instead of giving in, he leaned into prayer, drawing strength from the teachings of Padre Pio. He kept a small image of the saint in his wallet, a constant reminder of the battle against sin and the hope that lay on the other side. As Jonathan continued to grow in his faith, he began to share his story with others. He spoke of the darkness he had faced and the light he had found through God's grace. His vulnerability inspired those around him, showing that it was possible to overcome even the deepest struggles. Jonathan's life didn't just return to what it was before, it became something richer, deeper, and more meaningful. The pain and mistakes of his past no longer defined him. They became part of his testimony, a story of redemption and transformation. Now, let me ask you, have you ever felt the pull of grace in the midst of your struggles? Have you ever wondered if it's possible to find peace after years of feeling lost? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story and walk this journey with you. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Together, we'll uncover more stories of hope, transformation, and faith, drawing inspiration from incredible figures like Padre Pio. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's continue this journey together. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Jonathan had reached a point where the weight of his choices no longer felt bearable. Every attempt to find solace on his own seemed futile, leaving him feeling more hollow and disconnected than ever before. He knew he was caught in a cycle, one where shame led to isolation, and isolation only deepened his struggles. It was late one night, in the stillness of his apartment, that Jonathan finally broke. Tears streamed down his face as he fell to his knees on the worn carpet. For a long time he couldn't speak. He simply let the anguish pour out of him in the form of silent sobs. When he finally managed to find words, they came in a raw and desperate whisper. "God, I can't do this anymore. I need you." That prayer wasn't eloquent or rehearsed. It was a plea straight from the depths of his soul. And in that moment, something shifted. Jonathan felt a glimmer of hope, a whisper in his heart reminding him that he didn't have to face this battle alone. It was as though God had been waiting for him to ask, patiently standing by until Jonathan was ready to invite him into his pain. The next day, Jonathan woke up with an unusual sense of determination. He wasn't entirely sure what the next steps would look like, but he felt compelled to act. On a whim, he searched online for ways to overcome spiritual struggles, and one word kept appearing: confession. The idea felt intimidating. Jonathan hadn't been to confession since he was a child, and the thought of baring his soul to another person filled him with apprehension. But deep down, he knew this was a path he needed to explore. That Sunday, Jonathan mustered the courage to attend Mass at a church he hadn't visited in years. He slipped into a pew near the back, hoping to remain unnoticed. The familiar rhythms of the liturgy brought a strange mix of comfort and conviction. When the priest spoke about God's mercy during his homily, Jonathan felt as though the words were directed straight at him. After the Mass ended, Jonathan lingered, watching as others lined up near the confessionals. His heart raced. He wanted to join them but wasn't sure if he could. Memories of his past mistakes flooded his mind, and he worried that his sins were too great, too overwhelming for even God to forgive. Just as he was about to leave, an older man approached him and said something that would stay with him forever. "The confessional isn't a place of condemnation, it's a place of healing." Those words gave Jonathan the push he needed. Tentatively, he joined the line, his hands trembling as he clutched the edges of the wooden pew. When it was finally his turn, he stepped into the confessional and was greeted by the priest's warm, gentle voice. The priest didn't rush him or judge him. He simply listened. As Jonathan spoke, releasing years of guilt and shame, he felt a weight lifting from his heart. By the time the priest offered absolution, Jonathan felt a sense of peace that he hadn't experienced in years. That moment marked the beginning of a profound transformation. Jonathan realized that confession wasn't about being perfect. It was about acknowledging his imperfections and allowing God to work through them. It was a reminder that no matter how far he had strayed, God's mercy was always greater. From that day forward, Jonathan made it a priority to attend Mass regularly. He began to see the church not as a place of obligation but as a sanctuary, a space where he could reconnect with God and with himself. He started participating in the sacraments, finding strength and encouragement in the Eucharist and in the community around him. Through these experiences, Jonathan discovered that recognizing the need for God wasn't a one-time event. It was a daily choice. There were moments when he stumbled, when old habits tried to creep back in, but he learned to lean on prayer during those times. He would often recall the words of Padre Pio: "Pray, hope, and don't worry. Worry is useless. God is merciful and will hear your prayer." Those words became a mantra for him, a source of comfort and reassurance. Jonathan also started to notice changes in his relationships. The walls he had built around himself began to come down, allowing him to reconnect with friends and family in meaningful ways. He found that as he grew closer to God, he became more compassionate and forgiving, both toward others and toward himself. One of the most surprising things Jonathan discovered was the power of gratitude. By focusing on the blessings in his life, no matter how small, he was able to shift his perspective. Gratitude became a way for him to combat negativity and stay grounded in God's goodness. As Jonathan's faith deepened, he felt compelled to share his journey with others. He started small, opening up to a close friend who had also been struggling spiritually. To his surprise, the friend admitted that he had been feeling lost as well. Together, they began attending church events and Bible studies, finding strength in community and accountability. Jonathan's story is a testament to the fact that recognizing the need for God is often the first step toward healing and renewal. It's not an easy journey, but it's one that leads to freedom and joy unlike anything the world can offer. His life wasn't perfect, but it was filled with purpose, and he knew that God was walking alongside him every step of the way. Now, let me ask you, have you ever had a moment when you realized your need for God? What steps did you take to reconnect with Him, or what's holding you back from taking that step today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story and walk this journey with you. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. By joining us, you'll be part of a community that's all about exploring faith, finding hope, and growing closer to God. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's continue this journey together. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Jonathan's journey toward overcoming temptation is a testament to the depth of God's mercy and the boundless strength found in faith. His transformation was neither immediate nor easy. It was a process defined by deliberate action, unshakable determination, and the grace of God working in his life. At its core, his story is a powerful reminder that no matter how far we may stray, the path to redemption is always open to those willing to walk it. From the very beginning, Jonathan recognized that he needed a comprehensive approach to address the temptations that plagued him. This wasn't about addressing the symptoms, but confronting the root causes of his struggles. He understood that his journey would require both practical changes and a profound spiritual awakening. The foundation of Jonathan's battle was prayer. He didn't simply recite words. He engaged in heartfelt conversations with God, pouring out his struggles, fears, and hopes. Each morning, he began his day by surrendering it to God, asking for strength to resist the temptations he knew he would face. Throughout the day, he practiced the habit of silent prayer, pausing to connect with God in moments of uncertainty. At night, he reflected on his actions, seeking forgiveness for his failures and expressing gratitude for the victories, no matter how small they seemed. Jonathan also found solace in structured prayer practices, particularly the Rosary. Meditating on the mysteries of Christ's life helped him to focus on the virtues he wished to emulate. Each bead became a symbol of his commitment to grow in holiness, and each prayer reminded him of God's presence in his life. Fasting became another cornerstone of Jonathan's journey. Initially, he saw fasting as a form of self-denial, but he soon discovered its deeper purpose. By abstaining from small pleasures, he trained his willpower, aligning his desires with God's will. He fasted not just from food but also from distractions and habits that fed his temptations. Fasting became an act of worship, a way to unite his struggles with the sufferings of Christ. Recognizing his triggers was a turning point for Jonathan. He began to identify the situations, environments, and even people that led him closer to sin. Inspired by Jesus' words in Matthew 5 verse 29, "If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away," Jonathan made bold decisions to cut out anything that hindered his spiritual growth. He drastically altered his online habits, carefully curating the content he consumed to ensure it was uplifting and faith-centered. He also evaluated his social circles, choosing to distance himself from influences that encouraged destructive behaviors. While these changes were painful, Jonathan understood that true freedom required sacrifice. In his battle, Jonathan didn't go it alone. He realized that isolation made him more vulnerable, so he sought accountability. He opened up to a trusted mentor at his church, sharing his struggles in complete honesty. This mentor became a source of wisdom and encouragement, offering practical advice and spiritual guidance. Jonathan also joined a support group where he found solidarity with others who were overcoming similar challenges. The group met weekly, sharing testimonies, praying together, and celebrating progress. Knowing he wasn't alone gave Jonathan renewed strength to continue his fight. Scripture became a lifeline for Jonathan. He immersed himself in the Word of God, seeking passages that spoke to his heart and addressed his struggles. Verses like 1 Corinthians 10 verse 13 reminded him that he was not alone in his temptation. "No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear." These words became a source of hope, reassuring him that with God's help, victory was within reach. He memorized key verses, repeating them in moments of weakness as a way to refocus his mind and heart. Jonathan also embraced the sacraments, particularly the Eucharist and confession. Receiving communion became a moment of profound spiritual renewal, reminding him of Christ's sacrifice and love. Through confession, he experienced the healing power of God's mercy, releasing the burden of guilt and starting afresh each time. These sacraments became pillars of his spiritual life, grounding him in God's grace and strengthening his resolve. Creativity played an unexpected but vital role in Jonathan's transformation. He discovered that engaging in meaningful activities helped to redirect his energy and focus. He began painting scenes inspired by Scripture, using art as a form of prayer and meditation. He also volunteered at his local parish, helping with youth ministry and community outreach programs. These activities not only filled his time but also deepened his sense of purpose, making it easier to resist distractions. Jonathan's journey was marked by countless small victories and occasional setbacks. Each stumble served as a lesson, teaching him to rely more fully on God's grace. Over time, his mindset shifted. He no longer saw his struggle as a burden but as an opportunity to grow in virtue. He came to understand that overcoming temptation wasn't about achieving perfection, but about continually striving to live in alignment with God's will. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What strategies have helped you stay strong in your own spiritual journey? Have you found creative ways to deepen your relationship with God? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I can't wait to read your stories. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to this channel. By joining our community, you'll gain access to inspiring content that will strengthen your faith and provide practical tools for living a holy life. Hit that subscribe button now and become part of this journey towards spiritual growth and transformation. Together, we can overcome any obstacle and draw closer to God. Jonathan's transformation was nothing short of a miracle, an unfolding story that took place not only within him but also in the hearts and lives of everyone around him. It wasn't just a personal victory. It was a victory for his family, his friends, and the community that had witnessed his profound change. What started as a struggle with sin became a powerful testimony of redemption, a living example of what God can do when a heart is willing to submit to His will. From the moment Jonathan decided to walk away from his past, every day felt like a battle. But as time passed, he began to experience something extraordinary, a sense of peace that surpassed anything he had ever known before. It wasn't the absence of temptation or the end of his struggles, but rather an unshakable confidence that God was with him in every step, guiding him toward a better way of living. For Jonathan, the transformation didn't just come from within. It came from aligning himself with the eternal truths of the faith. He delved deeper into the teachings of Padre Pio and began to understand that true strength came from surrendering to God's grace. He started to recognize the power of prayer, how it could shape his thoughts, his desires, and his actions. He learned that prayer was not merely an act of asking for forgiveness or help, but a profound conversation with the divine that reoriented his entire life. But the road to this transformation was anything but smooth. There were days when Jonathan found himself falling back into old habits. The temptation to stray from the path seemed overwhelming at times. He felt vulnerable, like a warrior in the midst of battle. But in those moments of weakness, Jonathan would turn to God for strength. He learned to cry out in desperation, knowing that God's mercy would meet him where he was, no matter how far he had strayed. It was during one particularly difficult night, when the weight of temptation felt unbearable, that Jonathan felt a profound moment of clarity. He was in his room, alone, reflecting on the challenges he had faced. And as he knelt beside his bed, asking God to help him resist the pull of sin, something shifted within him. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his soul, and he suddenly understood that he didn't have to fight these battles alone. God was there, right beside him, offering strength and guidance. Jonathan's heart began to soften in ways he had never experienced before. The hardness that had once defined him, a hardness brought on by shame, guilt, and bitterness, began to melt away. He started to look at the world around him with compassion. His relationships improved, and the distance he had once felt between himself and others disappeared. He could see his family through new eyes, recognizing the sacrifices they had made for him and the love they had always shown, even in the most difficult of times. One of the most powerful transformations Jonathan experienced was in his relationship with God. Before his journey of renewal, he had viewed God as distant and judgmental. But as he grew closer to God, he began to understand that God was not a figure of condemnation, but a Father who was always ready to forgive and restore. This realization shifted Jonathan's approach to life. He stopped seeing himself as a failure and began to see himself as a beloved child of God, worthy of redemption. The more Jonathan prayed, the more he began to sense God's presence in every part of his life. He found peace in the quiet moments, in the stillness of the morning when he would sit in prayer, and in the bustle of his daily activities. He began to recognize that every moment could be an opportunity to grow closer to God, whether he was at work, in conversation with friends, or simply enjoying the beauty of creation. But Jonathan's transformation wasn't just about his internal healing, it was also about his external actions. As he grew in his relationship with God, he felt compelled to serve others. He realized that his pain, his struggles, and his redemption could be used to help others find the same freedom he had discovered. He began volunteering more at church, helping with various ministries, and sharing his testimony with anyone who would listen. Jonathan's heart was overflowing with gratitude, and he felt a deep need to give back. One of the most profound ways Jonathan served others was through his involvement in a support group for those struggling with similar issues. He knew firsthand how isolating it could feel to be caught in the grip of sin, so he wanted to create a space where people could find acceptance and healing. He wasn't interested in judging or condemning. He simply wanted to offer a listening ear and a word of encouragement. His vulnerability and honesty about his own journey gave others the courage to speak up about their struggles, and together they began to walk a path of healing. Jonathan's impact reached beyond the church walls. His transformation inspired many of his friends, colleagues, and even strangers to reconsider their own lives. They saw in him someone who had gone through immense struggles and come out on the other side stronger and more at peace. People began to ask him about his journey and how he had found the strength to change. Jonathan didn't hesitate to share his story, always pointing to God as the source of his transformation. Throughout this process, Jonathan held tightly to the words of Jesus. With man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Matthew 19 verse 26. He had come to understand that his transformation was not something he could accomplish on his own. It was only through God's grace, his power, and his mercy that he had been able to overcome the darkest parts of his life. And it was through God's love that he found the strength to continue living out his purpose. Jonathan's story didn't end with his transformation. It continued to unfold. He knew that the journey of faith was ongoing, and he embraced every step, no matter how challenging. His life became a living testimony of God's ability to heal, restore, and redeem. He understood that God's work in his life was not just for his benefit, but for the benefit of others who needed to see that change was possible. And now, I want to hear from you. Has God worked in your life in a way that has transformed you? Have you experienced a turning point or a moment of renewal like Jonathan did? I would love for you to share your story in the comments below. Your story could be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Join us on this incredible journey of transformation and renewal. Together, we can continue to support each other, grow in our faith, and inspire others to experience the life-changing power of God's love. Don't miss out. Let's walk this path together, one step at a time. I am deeply moved by the incredible journey we've just walked through together. We've witnessed the powerful transformation of Jonathan, a man once lost in the darkness of sin, who found his way back into the light through the transformative power of God. This wasn't just a story about one individual's redemption. It's a story that speaks to each and every one of us. It's a testament to the fact that no matter how far we've fallen, no matter how many mistakes we've made, there is always hope for renewal, healing, and grace. From the very beginning, we saw Jonathan as a person much like many of us, faced with temptation, struggling to resist the pull of earthly pleasures, and slowly losing touch with his faith and relationship with God. His story resonated with us because, in one way or another, we all face battles against temptation and sin. Whether it's the desire to control our own lives, the struggle with addictions, or the overwhelming weight of guilt and shame, we know what it feels like to wrestle with our own imperfections. As we followed Jonathan's journey, we saw how his choices began to distance him from the peace and joy that he once knew. We explored how sin, especially when left unchecked, doesn't just affect our relationship with God, but can have devastating consequences on our mental, emotional, and physical well-being. The more Jonathan gave into temptation, the more he felt the weight of his actions. Guilt, shame, and a sense of loss that grew deeper with each passing day. We've all been there at some point, haven't we? That feeling of emptiness and the despair that comes from believing we are unworthy of God's love. But Jonathan's story didn't end there. Just like many of us have experienced, there came a moment of desperation, an encounter with the truth that shook Jonathan to his core. He began to understand that the answer to his struggles didn't lie in trying to fight his battles alone, but in turning to God for help, in recognizing that he was powerless without divine intervention. This is where we see the first glimmer of hope, when Jonathan acknowledged his need for God. It's a powerful lesson for us all. In our weakest moments, we are often the closest to the healing and restoration that God is waiting to offer. It's also in these moments of vulnerability that we can begin to see how deeply we need God's grace. Jonathan's story reminds us of the importance of confession, repentance, and the power of prayer in overcoming our greatest struggles. He didn't have all the answers right away, But what mattered was his willingness to start somewhere, to surrender his will to God and trust in his plan for his life. This is where many of us start too. The willingness to humble ourselves, to confess, and to open our hearts to God's transformative power. As we continue through Jonathan's journey, we witnessed how he used both spiritual and practical strategies to resist the pull of sin. Prayer became his shield, fasting became his weapon, and seeking support from his community became his strength. Jonathan's story shows us that transformation doesn't come through willpower alone. It's a combination of divine intervention, self-discipline, and the strength that we find when we connect with others who are walking the same path. His ability to avoid situations that led him into temptation is a key aspect of his success. He didn't just sit back and hope that change would come. He actively took steps to protect himself. And that's something we can all apply in our lives. Through Jonathan's journey, we also saw the incredible power of community. No one can make this journey alone, and Jonathan's experience with his faith community shows us that when we come together, we are stronger. We can lift each other up, support one another through our struggles, and encourage each other to keep going when the road feels too difficult to travel. Whether it's a support group, a prayer circle, or just talking with someone who understands, the power of community cannot be underestimated. It's a reminder that we are never truly alone, and that God has placed people in our lives to help us through our darkest moments. Finally, we saw Jonathan's incredible transformation, not just for himself, but for the entire community. His story became a testimony of God's love, mercy, and grace. He didn't just heal for himself, he healed to serve others. He didn't just receive God's grace, he shared it, offering hope and encouragement to those who were walking similar paths. Jonathan's life became a reflection of what it means to be truly transformed, to find a new purpose, and to serve as an example for others. And that's the challenge for all of us, isn't it? To allow our own transformation to become a beacon of hope for others. But, just like Jonathan, this journey is not without its struggles. Transformation takes time, effort, and perseverance. It's not always easy, and there will be setbacks along the way. But as we've seen in Jonathan's life, every step forward is worth it. Every prayer, every confession, every act of kindness, it all contributes to our renewal, our growth, and our eventual victory over the things that once held us captive. If you've been moved by Jonathan's story and want to continue on this journey of transformation with us, I encourage you to check out our playlist, where we dive deeper into the themes of overcoming sin, finding spiritual strength, and living a life of purpose and faith. There's so much more to explore, and I'm certain that the other videos in this playlist will inspire, challenge, and encourage you to keep pressing forward on your own path of spiritual growth. But before you go, I want to hear from you. What stood out to you most in Jonathan's journey? How has God worked in your life to bring about transformation? Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. We'd love to continue the conversation and hear about your experiences. Your story could be exactly what someone else needs to hear to keep going. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got more inspiring stories, teachings, and spiritual insights coming your way, and you won't want to miss any of it. Join our community of like-minded individuals who are seeking to grow in their faith, overcome their struggles, and live out their purpose in Christ. You are not alone in this journey. We're in this together. So, click that subscribe button, explore our playlist, and let's continue this journey of transformation. Your story is important, and together, we'll continue to walk the path of redemption, renewal, and hope. Stay with us, and let's make this journey a shared one.